And I have the pleasure of introducing to you Dr. Charles Spinosa. We asked Charles to speak about leadership, flexibility, self-knowledge, what one keeps, what one throws away. And he will introduce us to his concept of what he calls existential death and how this is connected to plasticity and the growth mindset. I must tell you, Charles Spinosa, as you may have gathered by the name, by the way, he is a philosopher by training. He did his PhD at the University of California at Berkeley with one of the best-known American professors of philosophy, the late Professor Dreyfus. But he published in philosophy. If you Googled him, you will see publications of his in philosophy. But his career has not been mainly in philosophy, it has been in business consulting. So for the last 27 years, he has been a business consultant, introducing new ideas into consulting, into business consulting, particularly his idea that businesses are masterpieces and the role of leadership is to create masterpieces. That's one of his main ideas. Charles has extensive experience with several Fortune companies from all over the world, obviously Northern America, but also in Asia, China, and other places in the world. And he has been publishing a lot also about reflecting on his consulting experience. A book of his, very widely cited, Disclosing New Worlds, has been a more systematic effort to bring a more philosophical perspective or what it means to be an entrepreneur, entrepreneurship, how change can be managed, and so on. So Charles is someone who is very comfortable in the intellectual milieu, but at the same time is one who cares passionately for how ideas can make a difference to business life. And this is what he will share with us today. Charles, we're delighted to have you.
Thank you very much, Harry, and thank you all for coming here, especially after that wonderful lunch. I really appreciate it. I'd like to thank the organizing committee, too. It's been really splendid, and what a wonderful venue. I'd like to dedicate my talk today to Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, and I hope that by the end you'll think it was at least half worthy of that dedication. My topic today is existential plasticity, and it's something I've been thinking about for the last 10 years and developing my thinking through, so you're going to get the crowning part of that thinking. To begin with, about 10 years ago, when I started thinking about it, I said to my CEO and friend, Billy Glennon, when I was working for Vision Consulting, that we should change the way we answer our telephones. I said we should do it this way. Hello. This is Vision Consulting. Your existential death is approaching. What can we do for you? We never made that change in the way we answered our phones. I don't know whether that was good or bad, but I do know this, that if you want to rewire your companies and rewire yourselves in a way that isn't simply agile, where you're responding to one crisis after another, and doing that very quickly, if you want to retain your essence and respond to, you need to face your existential death. And so that's the first thing I'm going to talk about. What do I mean by existential death? Well, I don't mean what journalists or politicians mean. When they talk about existential death, they mean something coming to an end, and they love the word existential because it's a fancy word and it's like a fist pounding a table. I speak rather as an existentialist philosopher. And as an existentialist philosopher, I believe existence is doing something that matters. And existential death is when that mattering is gone. What's it like? Well, it's like when you feel you and your business are becoming irrelevant. When you feel that you're not producing the social value that successful businesses are always producing. And as you stop producing that social value for your community, the financial value starts declining. And people in your business, although not the leaders, find that they're just doing one task after another by habit. If that goes any further, you become a zombie. And that's what existential death is. That's what we're trying to avoid. As a leader, you certainly face existential death, every one of you. Why? Well, you stand for something, and you value something that you stand for. Moreover, you have opponents, competitors, and others who don't like what you stand for, who stand against it, and want to devalue what you do. Also, there are always, in our mixed world, social trends that are running against your business. When a social trend and an opponent come together, you're directly looking at existential death. And it's not just leaders. Maybe in the discussion section, I'll say how I'm facing existential death as well. So we're all in the same boat. Some say that existential death is in the form of crises. Consider a pandemic, climate change, wars, supply chain dislocations, populist rebellions, banking excesses, government miscalculations. In my experience, business leaders are actually great at handling those emergencies. In fact, if I were to ask for a show of hands, I bet that most of you have been through 6 out of the 7 of those emergencies and survived, and maybe 7 out of the 7 of the emergencies and survived. Emergencies don't change what is meaningful to you, your customers, your company. So what do you do when you face an emergency? Basically, you double down. You double down a little creatively, you create a war room, and you provide the good that you've been providing all along with more intensity, more resolve, and a little bit more creativity. That's good. You respond to existential death, if you respond to it, beginning that same way. But existential death is different from a crisis. Existential death creeps up on you, particularly in the form of social change. Let me give you some examples. A lot of companies, oil companies for instance, were valuable because of their physical assets. And right now, our social trend is not to value physical assets, it's to value intellectual assets. Philip Ledbetter from the UK says we're becoming a weightless society. By that he means what we value are things that have no weight. They're ideas that we value, not physical assets. I ran into this dramatically with a client I had in the UK. It was a family business. He started with trucks, and he was great at transporting volatile chemicals around the UK. He did it just in time, reliable in every way, didn't have many competitors, moved to Europe, and then moved to Asia. But then what happened? His customers wanted to pay less and less and less for the delivery of those goods. Seemed like the trucking business was going nowhere. Then he had I think it was a relative who came in and brought computers. And it went from the Sutton Group to Sutton Logistics. And that changed everything. They promised just-in-time delivery, totally reliable. That was what they'd been delivering, but now you got a note on your phone. What happened? Well, intellectual assets. People valued them, and customers were happy again to pay the premium for shipping volatile chemicals. Are you in retailing? Anybody here in retailing? If you're in retailing, you're no doubt afraid of Amazon or an Amazon lookalike. And you should be. You should be. But notice, Amazon is an opponent that's coupled with a social trend. What's the social trend? We tend to value convenience now more than friendly warmth. If you're a retailer, particularly a bricks and mortar retailer, you probably can compete on friendly warmth and beat everyone. You know how to do that. Can you offer the convenience of a huge online retailer where with the push of a button, somebody gets package delivered to their home the next day with the goods they want. If you can't, you're facing existential death too. How about banking? Banking's the classic. If you're in banking, you already know that there are algorithms to tell you who to loan to. From very small things like cars to huge corporate transactions. There are algorithms making the trades for you. There are algorithms telling you what the risk is. Worse than that, the algorithms get better and better and better just as they function longer and longer and longer. It turns out robots really like money. However, bankers are still good at one thing, though I just read in the Wall Street Journal that IBM's Watson is trying to create an algorithm for this too. Bankers are generally good at managing regulators better than algorithms. But if you went into banking to take small businesses and make them mature businesses, to take individual clients and help them grow their wealth and security, to de-risk saving, to de-risk lending, any of those cool activities, managing regulators is no competition for that. You're facing existential death too. So the question is, what do we do in the face of existential death? And I'm going to give you a simple framework for how you handle existential death. And I'll talk through it pretty quickly and give you an example from one of my clients from RSA, which is a global insurance company. And the part of RSA that I worked in was in the UK selling commercial insurance to mid-sized businesses. Okay, so here's the framework. Number one, identify the existential death approaching. That's actually not so easy, and people tend to turn away from it. Why? Because they can see something coming. It is disturbing, but it's not there on the doorstep. It's not right away. So you believe you can just push it off, like any of those social trends I just described. RSA leaders didn't do that. They saw that insurance, the insurance they sold, was becoming a commodity. In fact, people were trying to generate standardized policies and sell those to businesses at very low costs. With that, it was very clear that AI could come in and replace underwriters and underwriting. So they saw that death approaching, and they identified what was essential to them that would kill. RSA believed it had the best underwriters in the business, and it was generally acknowledged to have the first or second best. Lloyd's of England might have had the best, but they were right up there. So they identified what was under attack, and then they did what we do in a crisis. They doubled down. They hired the best underwriters they could find to save their essence, and they required that these underwriters write customized policies for customers, even if the customers didn't want them. They wanted customers to get a sense of how valuable a customized insurance policy would be. They did that, and they had mixed results. And this is where things in managing existential death and existential plasticity turn different from a crisis. What do you do in a crisis when you get mixed results? Well, you're really happy with the good results you're getting, and you double down again. Facing existential death, you have to do that. You have to look at what deep question is being posed to you by the mixed results. With RSA and the underwriters, they discovered that the brokers who sold the insurance to businesses really thought the underwriters, these smart guys, were way too arrogant, looked down on them, and they didn't like bringing business to RSA. Any customer that wanted something customized went to RSA right away. The bulk of other customers didn't go. So then you have to make a choice. And it's a very hard choice because it's a choice where you're giving up something you love as a business. Give up your pride in underwriting and try to develop friendly relations with brokers. My job at the time was working with a team to train these brilliant underwriters to develop friendly relations with brokers. It was not easy. We could do it, and we did. And when we did it, RSA faced its existential death with plasticity, turned around. Net written premium, which is insurance for revenues, went up by 30%, which was something unheard of, without changing the cost, without changing the price of the insurance company. So RSA did that, fended off the death, and described a new essence. And the new essence was, it was about relationships with brokers and with their customers. It wasn't about the most brilliant underwriting around. Okay, generally one question comes to me when I go through this, and it's, can't we go from step 1 to step 5 right away, just like that? I have never found in my consulting career, a business, or in my own experience, a moment where I was that smart and that ruthless. Remember, this means that you face something that you love in your business, that you value highly, that you're going to give up. We have to go through the mixed results phase. We have to make the hard choice. And it's not easy. And that's what the remainder of this talk is going to be about, because these steps are easy and conceptually easy, and you probably could have named some of them or all of them yourselves. The talk is about the emotional part of what you go through, the emotional and moral part of what you go through. And so I'm going to give you a story from Steve Jobs. And the reason I'm using Steve Jobs, he wasn't a client of mine, but he was enormously expressive, emotionally and conceptually. So I'll take you through that. I'm going to start with Steve Jobs' triumphant. That is when he came back to Apple after the Scully years. Apple was a mess. What did he do? He cut 70% of the products under development. He cut staff by 3,000, which was a very serious cut in Apple at the time. And he turned Apple profitable for 3 quarters. And as I say, at Macworld in 1998, he was triumphant. He coined the phrase, think profit. We all think different. This was think profit. And later that year, he would introduce the iMac, which would go on to sell 800,000 versions of it. So really successful year. But very shortly after that, Steve Jobs faced existential death. And it happened, and by the way, this slide is from the slides he used at his convention. Beloved PC, RIP, rest in peace. Walter Mossberg, in December 28th, 2000, wrote, "The PC, which has carried the digital revolution for 24 years, has matured into something boring." Jobs took Mossberg seriously. In fact, he said very complimentary things about Mossberg. He said Mossberg is probably the only journalist who thinks about computers the way Apple does. So he took it very seriously, and he started answering him in about 3 weeks. But he talks about what he thought about then. And this is what it feels like to face existential death. He said, if for some reason we make some giant mistakes, we're going to enter a sort of computer dark ages for about 20 years. Now, if you think about it, the first thing you're going to say is, that's pretty self-important. That's pretty self-dramatizing. And it is. But, and I'm here to say, it's not just Americans who talk this way. When you're facing existential death, that's how you feel. You feel that you're losing something really valuable that you love, and it's just going out of the world. And things are falling apart. For Jobs, the issue was the crazy ones, the rebels, the misfits would no longer be able to do their quirky innovation. That was what was dying. If you don't feel that way when you're looking at existential death, look again. What does he do? Well, he identified what he thought was under attack. And Jobs had a very peculiar notion of what the PC was about. If you remember the first Mac desktop, it allowed you to move all your digital work around. It was like a desktop. You could move the work around. And he thought of it as a work hub. That's what the PC was. And he realized that to do that, it required a huge amount of integration of software and hardware, the operating system. And he said, we're the only company that owns the whole widget, the hardware, the software, the operating system. We can take full responsibility for the user experience. We can do things that the other guys can't do. And that's what he wanted to create, an integrated user experience, and he thought it required integrated software. And what he did in January was he said, Mac can become the digital hub of our emerging digital lifestyle, adding tremendous value to our digital devices. And that was his basic idea. You couldn't, on your camera or movie projector, edit films and turn them into movies or edit your pictures and so forth. And the same for music. You needed a computer to do that. And that's how it would be the hub. And that was his vision. You would use your Mac to edit movies and to edit music. He tried Photo Hub first. It wasn't a very big hit. But then iTunes, that came out in early 2001, and it enabled you to speak the way they spoke in those days, to rip, which is basically download, mix, burn, and play. And you could play even on the portable Rio app, which was considered cool then. By the end of the year, he introduced the iPod. That allowed you to have 1,000 songs in your pocket, courtesy of Toshiba. And the stark white beauty that came from Joni Ive made it a hit. In fact, it was so much a hit that Paul Vidic, who was in fact a client of mine at the time, Paul Vidic from Warner Music said, maybe this could save us. And he met with Steve Jobs. He didn't tell me at the time he was meeting with Steve Jobs. What did he do? Well, he went to Steve Jobs. He was facing an existential crisis too. The crisis? Napster, Grokster, Nutella, Kazaa. They were all free file servers. Essentially, if you bought a CD, you could download the CD and use this to send out copies of any song that you wanted to all your friends, relatives, anybody. And what could it do? It could destroy the music industry. No royalties go to artists or record companies when that happens. And that's what Paul Vidic was facing, the end of the music company. And what did he say? He was very frank and open. We don't know what to do. You need to help us figure it out. And Jobs did. Jobs had the intuition that people liked musicians enough that they would pay 99 cents for a song rather than get it free. And if they could pay 99 cents and get a far better recording of the song, that would be powerful. So that's what he said. He said, sell digital songs to the iTunes store for 99 cents a piece, pay the record company 70 cents, let users create their playlists on integrated systems, including the iTunes Store, iTunes, the iPod, and the iMac. The integration was really important to him. Did it work? The results, again, were mixed. They were mixed not because he didn't produce a great experience, he did, but the Macintosh only had 5% of the computer market. To save the music industry, Jobs would have to give up the integration and enable the iTunes Store and the iPod to run off a Windows computer. That's something he loved, the integration. What did he do? Well, Phil Schiller, his senior vice president of world product marketing, said, we felt we should be in the music player business, not just the Mac business. Jobs' first words were, over my dead body. That is what it feels like when you're facing that hard choice. Your first words are going to be something like that. But he did finally make the hard choice, and I want to tell you what that's like. To become insanely great and save the music industry and all the poetry, Jobs would have to extend iTunes and the iPod to Windows computers. Such moments are hard. We tend to feel surly when we make them. I'm going to show you what he said. I'm going to show you how he said yes to his senior team. This is a classic yes. Screw it. I'm sick of listening to you assholes. Go do whatever the hell you want. That's the yes that comes with existential plasticity. The rest is history. The iTunes store sold 70 million songs in the first year. By 2007, iPod accounted for half of Apple's sales. By the way, in the RSA story that I was repeating, these were all sort of UK people who weren't as expressive as Jobs, but they hemmed and hawed in exactly the same way. And the yes, you can train our great underwriters to be friends with brokers. We'll let you train this many. Ooh, it worked. We don't like this. We'll let you train this many. It was just drawn out. This is far better. Screw it. Do whatever the hell you want. Okay, what happens, I promised you discover You don't only change your business, you discover a deeper essence, and that's what Jobs discovered. He said this over and over again, it's technology married with the humanities that yields the result that makes our heart sing. And he went on to say, my goal has always been not only to make great products, but to build great companies. What's the essence he discovered in making this gut-wrenching choice? To build a great company at the crossroads of technology and the liberal arts. And so that's what existential plasticity gets you. But I believe, for those of you here, it can get you something more. And this is something Jobs was struggling to figure out how to say, and said it roughly towards the end of his life. He said, a lot of us want to contribute, and I think this is probably true for all of you here, a lot of us want to contribute something back to our species. It's about trying to express something in the only way most of us know how, because we, business leaders, can't write Bob Dylan songs or Tom Stoppard plays. We try to use the talents we have to express our deep feelings, to show our appreciation of all the contributions that came before us, and to add something to that flow. If that's what you're trying to do, then what you're trying to do is create masterpieces. And that's what I think existential plasticity is for. That's why I believe it's far better than agility, than being a change agent, than just change. It's for creating masterpieces. So, your existential death is approaching. How can I help? And first thing, I want to say Leadership as Masterpiece Creation is a book coming out in December. It's written by Charles Spinosa, Harry Sukas, and Matt Hancox. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Charles. Charles was under strict instructions not to exceed 20 minutes. That's why he was so, which is superb.
Did I come
because
close?
I wanted us to have a conversation about these ideas. So any questions, please send them to me, or if you want to take the floor. I have several, but okay. Charles, can we go back to some of these basic ideas? I think we can sit down, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. So that you can unpack some of them for us. Can you expand a little bit on the idea of creating masterpieces?
Very briefly. Actually, yes. Let me do it historically. I was consulting for a good 15 years, helping people figure out ways to change what they were doing in the market, to bring different products or different channels to market so that they could grow their markets, grow their profitability, and avoid existential death. And I discovered that this was really hard for clients. You're giving up something you love. And it wasn't until I found that I had to help them see their deeper essence in that change-making that it clicked. The client said, yes, I want to do this, not just because it'll enable my business to survive, but because I really care about it. That's who I am. That moment where Jobs said, I'm at the crossroads of technology and liberal arts street, that was the moment I started going for. And when I started going for that moment, it changed my consulting around. When I started going to a company that was in trouble in some way, I would start talking to the leader, saying, what masterpiece do you want to create? And that's the business we're going to get in, and that's what we're going to do. What's distinctive about you? Now, I'm going to take you through a process where you're going to have to give up something you love. But at the end, you create a masterpiece. And I discovered more and more that caused these leaders, their hearts to sing. And so my thesis is, we know that the mold-changing leaders at the very top, the Jeff Bezos, the Steve Jobs do it. But if you look at your small stores in your town, you see that there's a leader in a store who's expressing a vision of what it is to be a hardware store, what it is to be this shop or that shop, this dress shop. People in between are all trying to do the same, and that's what I'm trying to help them do. Did that answer your question, Henry?
Yes. I think you want us to appreciate, to use the language of Alistair Levy in the morning, it is the inner map. What do you stand for? What do you deeply care about? I think you're going to put this question to the mind of every leader. Think about what you passionately care, because this is going to guide you in your decision making.
I want to be more troubling than that. This is where Sophocles and Aeschylus and Euripides will help. What people say they normally care about first in the first moment is something that virtually everybody cares about. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take them through what they care about, in a certain sense, destroy some of that to find something that they care about even more. And so my sense of purpose cuts against purpose to begin with. You need purpose. I'm all for I don't like using the word. I like using the word masterpieces. I like speaking more like an artist. Why is it? Because I don't think most business leaders are like social workers who have a purpose. In my experience, and you can ask yourselves, I see most business leaders as like artists who are trying to create, with the tools they have, just as Jobs said, a masterpiece. They can't do a Bob Dylan song, they can't do a Tom Stoppard play, but they can turn their business into something that's remarkable and people see how different it is from other businesses.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions here. One is, what are the signs that we need to know to realize that we are approaching our existential death? How will I know whether what I'm facing is the approach of existential death?
Okay. Basically, there are two sides of this, but it requires what Alistair said earlier. It requires a sense of calm, because you're responding to one emergency, then another emergency, then another emergency. You're not asking. But the recipe I use is, who's your fiercest competitor? What social trend is that competitor relying on to destroy you? It's not so easy to see, and it takes some thinking. But we were talking about the oil industry earlier. Well, one of the things that's standing against the oil industry is, obviously, I mentioned it, the devaluation of physical assets. But there's also a devaluation of the petroleum world with all of the enormous material success that it has produced. And I think that the enemies of the petroleum world, the ones who are devaluing it, the ones who insist that we be green tomorrow, that's that social trend that is the enemy. And that's the death. And that's the social trend, I believe, ultimately, the oil industry, if it succeeds, is going to have to face. And I can talk at length about how you would go about facing that, if you want. Get spiritual is the answer.
I think we have seen when Mr. Xanatakis, he was describing his company, the petroleum business, I think I could see there this kind of concern with diversifying, taking on activities which are not part of our core of activities. Presumably, is it to avert some kind of...
Yeah, I think all three of the people that were here earlier, and I can't pronounce their names, I apologize to each one of you, had something of that. Remember, they all said, we're bringing on board young people. Remember that? Every one of them, even as different as they were, we're bringing on board young people. And what are they doing? They're bringing on board young people to see what they have to do to convert them into lovers of the industry. If they can do that without just giving up their essence entirely, they will find a way, an existentially plastic way, to overcome their existential death. And if they fail to do that, if it's all the same bromides and the same political slogans that the young people came in with, they're in a spiral that will be unfortunate.
Just to clarify, when you use the adjective existential in front of plasticity, existential plasticity, you're going to convey the message that plasticity is important when about things that matter to us. That's the reason you use existential before plasticity. Am I right?
Yes, I mean, plasticity is a general term for change.
Yeah.
Right, and you can have lots of changes. Existential plasticity is how do you manage the change when what matters to you is declining? How do you bring up, save something related to that that still matters to you? Existential is all about mattering. At least this, I don't want to go into a philosophy class essay, but
Yeah.
for the sake of this,
I have several questions here for you, Charles. One is, what question do I have to ask myself if I can't find my existential purpose as a leader? I guess if I were to rephrase it, it would be, how can I find what matters to me? What kind of questions do I need to ask myself? Is it a matter of introspection, just sitting back and reflecting? I guess it's more than that.
You can do it by sitting back and reflecting. In fact, I'm a strong believer, if you're like a Stoic Seneca, he gave a bunch of questions you could ask yourself. You're really asking yourself, what do I do in this business that is distinctive and that comes from me? As leaders of businesses who have to speak to journalists and others and people in conferences like this, we're always ready to answer the question, what's distinctive about my business? Why should it survive? And so forth. But we don't generally ask the question, what's distinctive about my business that comes from me, that comes from my heart, that I have made, that I have grown, that's alive? And then the second question, which we're trained, I won't say we're trained in business school, but we're trained by society not to ask, is what would that be if it flowered? One of my clients ran gas lines throughout the London area. You wouldn't think of that as a very interesting business. But he loved his business because every time there was a crisis, a fire caused by gas, he forced his team to come up with an innovation. A new way of using a robot through the pipes, the new way of organizing when they spray water and when they spray other things. He was innovating. Now, he was very constrained, but that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to have innovation in gas lines. And organizing his division of his company so that he could do that would give him a masterpiece. That's what we worked on. He had a fellow director around Leicester. I'm sorry, these English towns probably don't mean anything. North of London, who wanted essentially to manage his business as a general on top of a hill and have an eagle's eye view of everything so that he could put people in the right place at the right time to correct problems. That was going to be his masterpiece. So the consulting went in two different directions inside this company. I think I'm answering your question. It's find out what's distinctive in you and then find out what would make that a masterpiece. That's what you do. You can do that in conversation with your senior team. You can do that in conversation with others. Or if you're good and can be tough on yourself, you can do that by reflection. But you have to be sort of like Seneca to be able to do it by reflection yourself.
Thank you, Charles. Another question is, can you link your framework to personal, professional, existential death and the implication to succession planning? How should the leader deal with it? Screw it, I have to step down?
How should the leader deal with it? You're right. There is going to be a moment where you say, screw it, I have to. You're actually going to say something worse than that. You're going to say, screw it, I have to step down and let this asshole take over. But that way of saying yes is just fine in my book. I mean, you don't want to go out and tell the press corps that. But if that's what you're saying in your heart, if that's what you're saying to your senior team, you've already come to the realization. But the difficult thing is finding out who you can trust to take your organization into the future. That's what I always find as really difficult. And it is, what do we want? We want somebody who's going to take the masterpiece we've created and make sure that's preserved. Take that on. That's what we want deep down in our hearts. But really, the person who's going to successfully take over our reins is the person that we see who is out to create the most compelling masterpiece of all those others. You can mentor them around how much they get to spend. You can mentor them around how to make wise investments. You can mentor them around all those other tactical things, and they will need that mentoring. That is why they're assholes. They're prone to make mistakes. You've experienced a hell of a lot, and you know better. They need the mentoring, but allowing them go after the masterpiece that could be the new masterpiece, that's what I believe makes successful succession.
And how do you handle the sacred cows? And how do you convince the key stakeholders to follow you in this transition?
Ooh, who asked that one? That's a brilliant question. Whoever asked that question.
I don't know. It's anonymous, but it's
okay.
But it's a fascinating question about sacred cows.
Yeah, okay, I love it. Pat yourself on the back. Pour yourself an extra drink tonight in my name, in my honor. Brilliant question. Harry and I actually wrote a paper on this. How do you handle the sacred cows? Well, you'll start out trying to persuade people to give up the sacred cows. I'm going to stand up for this. You'll try to persuade people to give up their sacred cows, and you will fail. That's the whole point of sacred cows. People are not going to give them up. What's the answer? Move forward, be bold, take your action. Let them see that the sacred cows are dead and there's a new masterpiece arising. Can I give an example? Mm-hmm. I have to. Okay, my favorite illuminating example of this is Winston Churchill from England, the beginning of the Second World War for England. At the time, the English people were a buoyant people who believed that gentlemanly judgment reigned and that everybody wanted to be a gentleman. And their leaders, except for Churchill, all believed this. And so how are they going to deal with Hitler? Well, it's obvious. You appease enough until he discovers that he wants to be a gentleman, and then you're done. Only Churchill saw how ferocious Hitler was. Now, in a certain sense, he got lucky. I can't remember all the countries Hitler invaded prior, but at a certain point, England was in the war, officially, because of the treaties it had. And the ruling people, Chamberlain, could no longer hold the Tory party. So three of the leading Tories asked Churchill to take over as prime minister. But they were all scheming in the background to remove him. First act he did, he couldn't just say, stop this appeasement, stop this gentlemanly stuff, get with it, he's ferocious. Actually, he did say that. He wrote it in the newspapers. But that didn't persuade anybody or nearly enough people. So, when the English army was headed to Dunkirk, and the German army was coming behind them, and it looked like the English army could be destroyed, he realized that he had a garrison in Calais. And even though his top general and advisor had been the general of that garrison, he ordered them to fight to the death to delay Hitler's advance. No evacuation. And they did. And you would say, people get it. That's the ferocity it's going to take to win the Second World War. He blew it. He blew it by giving his most famous speech in Parliament the next day about we're going to fight on the beaches, in the hills, and so forth. And people were so excited by that. They didn't get, oh my God, this is a sacrifice that you have to make. This is a sacred cow you have to kill off. So then, when France fell, the French Navy was at Oran, most of the French Navy. If Hitler got the French Navy, it could compete with the British Navy. He gave the French admiral a choice. Sink your ships, go to British ports, or we will destroy your ships. The admiral hesitated. He ordered the attack. They sank the ships, killed 1,200 French sailors who were essentially their allies. And Churchill said, "This is a Greek tragedy." He went to Parliament. He gave no speech with any flourishes. He said, "This is what we have done." It clicked. They said, "This is what it's going to take. This is the kind of warfare and sacrifice we have to be willing to make to win the Second World War." And so for the first time, his own party unified around him, the country unified around him. And that was the beginning of the victory in the Second World War. He had to go forward even though he couldn't persuade people. So in answer to the brilliant question, you have to get sufficient momentum, people, whatever it is, and you trample the sacred cows. You have to kill them. You'll never persuade people. And if you do not want to die trying to persuade them. That's a terrible way to go out as a leader. Okay.
Thank you, Charles. I mean, we have talked about this several times. I know. I think if I were to summarize all this, I think your advice would be, if you need to be ruthless, you must be ruthless. And I would probably add that if you can make yourself into a more sacred cow than the existing sacred cows, that's even better.
Ah, yes.
Would this be?
Yes, you know it. Harry and I wrote a paper, published a paper on this, and that's exactly right. And I could say more. You control me, so
that's all right.
To keep your audience happy.
Another question is, let me see. Right, mostly strategies are made by one team, top management team, and they are supposed to be executed by another team. Do you think companies can achieve better results if they combine strategy formulation and strategy execution, wherein the same team is made responsible for both strategy and formulation and execution? It's by Athanasios Raptis. So I suspect what Mr. Raptis is asking is, typically we split the two, the formulation and the execution of strategy, but would it be best if the two were aligned?
Well, the answer to this one is very simple. Not only is it best, but you don't create a masterpiece unless you're getting the people who are executing it with you really involved in the strategy. And so I consider it not just the best, I consider it essential. If you do not do that, you're creating tons of resistance for yourself. Because this is what people in execution are thinking. Does he really want to push it that far? Does he really want to push it that hard? Nobody thought Churchill was going to bomb the French Navy, really. He's not going to push it that far. Not going to push it that far. Jeff Bezos faced the same problems. He had to fire his founding employee. Nobody's going to push excellence that hard, they said. He did. So yes, the team that is doing the execution should be tightly bound with the team that's doing strategy. Keep them close to you. I believe if you're a leader and you're going after a masterpiece, the head of the team who is doing strategy is you. And therefore, yes, you want them bound with you.
Okay, before I go on with one or two of questions of mine, I want to see whether people have any questions.
There's over there, Harry, I can see.
Yes, the lady at the back. Yeah.
Thank you. Hello, Charles. I would like to ask, it's inevitable that we live in an environment that change is constant, and changes often create fear in organizations. And fear is an enemy of innovation. Is there any way that we can train our leaders, and mainly the talented ones, to be proactive and in reading and creating strategies that will avoid this phase of death?
I think that's a really profound question, but could you restate it for me, Harry? Because
it's the question of often crisis and change create fear, which is a problem, and it may lead to paralysis. The question then is, how can we create strategies that can cope with this? Am I missing something? Yeah.
She said yes.
How can we create strategies that can cope with this?
I've got it. This is a brilliant question. This is a second brilliant question. I can't see you. Stand up again. Purchase this woman a drink tonight, please. This is a fabulous question. And it's really important because we are living right now in a world of fear. Notice how you've gone to meetings like this and people speak about all the crises we're facing and how they're unrelated crises and how it's really awful. I listened to Alistair's talk this morning and I was shaking. And, oh my God, this is terrible. There are fear-mongers who are better and more powerful than, who really love doing this crisis. They don't give the good news at the end. That's us because we're afraid. We want safety. Where did that come from? Everybody wants safety now. Safety used to be something that was prudential. You were doing something risky and you got your checklist of safety. Now we want safety. Everyone wants safety in the college classroom. We want safety to tell your boss he's doing something wrong. We live in a world of fear. And that's what causes us to see all these crises. When I was growing up, when I was 9 years old, I grew up in the United States. I assume most of you can hear that from my accent. When I was 9 years old, my mother gathered my brother and me, he was 8 years old, together one day in the autumn. And she said, I want you to know that we are all very likely to die. The Russians are in Cuba. Our president has ordered a blockade. We're likely to face nuclear war. And this was the days when every school child in America practiced once a week, squatted down like that under their desk in case of nuclear war. It was a crazy thing. We did not live with that much fear then as we live with now. Objectively, there was a whole lot to be afraid of. We didn't have that fear. Now, we look at the crises, as I say. I think that everybody in this room has gotten through a crisis, or 2, or 3, or 4 already. Fear is what we are facing. Fear is what we have to battle. Thank you. The only way I know now of battling fear is to get people focused on what their masterpieces could be. That's the only way I've found. You can do other measures, but that's the primary way. Thank you for asking that question.
Charles, just to extend a little bit, it can be controversial, but do you think faith has anything to do with this? Religious faith?
You mean the state of the world we're in?
No, I mean, at an individual level, do you find that people who have some belief, metaphysical beliefs, religious beliefs, cope better with fear?
Yes.
We know this, by the way, we know from research that people who fall ill with cancer, for example, tend to be more resilient once they have faith in God.
Yes. I have no doubt about that. In all my consulting experience, that's the case. The simpler way to put it, if you want a simple way to put it, and I'm not asking you to give up faith, what goes with faith, at least in the Abrahamic religions, is hope. Hope is the enemy of fear. if you can get yourself and your company into a mood of hope, and we had say the name of the woman who runs the shipping company.
Yes, Mrs. Bezantaku, yeah.
I can't say that name.
Yeah,
but
that's all right.
She if you all remember, she came and she
Yeah.
brought the mood of hope. Nobody in her company has any fear. I mean, momentary fear here and there. But that's what she exudes.
Hope, yeah.
Hope. Oh, crises. We've been in crises for the last 4,000 years. We're Greek after all. We have Sophocles. We have Aeschylus. We have Euripides. We know crises. That's what we're about, hope. She was fantastic. Yes, that's it. It's really hard to maintain it in the world, but that is my consulting answer to the question. When I go into a company and I cannot talk the CEO into creating a masterpiece, I say, okay, let's create a culture of hope. And we frequently succeed. It's a tough slog if the person doesn't want a masterpiece. Yeah. But yes, did I answer clearly enough?
That's fine, yeah, yeah. Another question is, which will take us to AI. Do CEOs face existential death from ChatGPT and generative AI and AI machines? Do you see any kind of death? This is quite tough, actually.
Okay. I'm really, who asked that one?
Well, it's anonymous, I don't know.
Okay, I'm just going to shoot from the hip. I've actually been thinking about this. My son uses the current version of ChatGPT to try to replace me. You can use it for fatherly advice. So I told him this wouldn't work, but that was not enough. He went and asked ChatGPT if it would work, and ChatGPT said, yes, of course this will work. So I did a little bit of research. I don't know exactly where artificial intelligence is going, but I do know this. Right now, ChatGPT and all the generative intelligence, this is what people in AI say, hallucinates. It hallucinates. What that means is it makes something up. And what that means, if you're relying on it, is it lies. And you don't know where unless you do all the research and work yourself. So if you're in charge of a bunch of writers writing boring television shows where lying doesn't matter yet, they'll go. If your press has lost any sense of truthfulness, the journalists can go too. But I do not believe in businesses, first of all, that are creating masterpieces. There's a threat, much of a threat yet, from generative intelligence. But if your business is boring and you're just seeking to survive, maybe then there's a threat. I advise you, create your masterpieces, and that will disable the threat.
So I suspect, Charles, reading a little bit between the lines of what you said, is that I think you're not threatened, you businesses are not threatened by AI to the extent to which they do things that matter to those in charge. Generative AI and ChatGPT can spew out lots of things, but don't care about anything. That caring is not in AI. It is in natural intelligence and natural in human beings.
Right. I mean, the way we used to say it is robots don't give a damn. Right? Mm-hmm. That's one way to say it. But the other point is, if you're making your business distinctive, think about how ChatGPT works. It finds what's probable. It finds the probable next word, the most likely next word. It appeals to the herd. It is getting the best of the herd. The way I'm an old professor, I'm a recovering professor. ChatGPT can't produce A papers. It can produce low B papers because it's saying what other people have already said. That's its goal. And in fact, the creator of ChatGPT, when he was talking about hallucination, said the way we're creating it so it's not really destructive, is it's giving other people's opinions. It's giving the likeliest other person's opinions. That's what it does. So if you, yeah.
And one more question from our audience is, how do you continue to create masterpieces in such a dynamic period of change? Jobs led the way with the iPod and downloads, but Apple missed streaming to Spotify, and now is clearly a follower in this area.
Yeah.
Another good question.
Yeah, that's a nice question. And that's the question, should I be agile or should I try to create a masterpiece? If you're agile, you're going to be moving around and spotting things and trying to get out ahead of them. The question is that a life that you can make valuable for yourself and your employees? If you create a masterpiece, you can take a few hits. You can miss Spotify. You can miss other things. It's the masterpiece that will be distinctive enough that will keep your customers and the communities that support you alive long enough. I just finished a consulting gig for a company that had become a masterpiece and had moved into decline. It's an IT software company that does protection. In fact, if you try to use something and you have to type in your phone number to prove that it's you, there are 2 companies on the planet that do that. This company was one of those. They haven't had an innovation in 5 years. 5 years in IT, imagine that, not a single innovation. They're still surviving. They were living in fear. They had let their masterpiece decay. You get a runway once you create a masterpiece. People admire it that much. Now, you don't get a runway forever. We had to come in and help them find who was innovating. We had to do the thing that you suggested, create a mood of hope. And out of that, they're resuscitating themselves. But yes, once you create a masterpiece, you can take hits, you can even go into a decline for a while, pull out by creating another masterpiece.
And 2 questions from me, Charles, the final ones. One is, I think what you described about jobs and your clients, I think it is, in a sense, you're talking about intuition. When Job says, this is what I want to do against the stream, this is something that I feel that needs to be done. I think he's speaking with a conviction of intuition. Not so much analytical mind, but the intuitive mind. But we tend to be mistrustful of intuition. Or let me phrase it a bit more positively. How can we sort of trust, should we be trusting our intuitions? And how? And in what conditions?
Wow, that is a good question. Somebody should buy you a drink tonight, Harry. So thank you. Why do we dislike intuition? Well, we have all those analytical people saying that there are studies that were wrong. I don't believe in just any old intuition. And this might have come out of what I said, and this might have come out of the dedication, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides. I believe in broken-hearted intuition. When you're facing your death, when you're facing the death of your company, when you're facing the death of what's valuable, it's at that moment, if you're honest with yourself, that you can trust your intuitions. If you are just in a moment of arrogance or a moment of I know what's best or I know it all, you should distrust your intuitions because you're living in a way that's false, that's not true. And intuitions that come out of that are likewise false and not true. And this is why the earlier speakers were insisting on openness. I don't know actually if this is why they were saying that, but this is why I insist on openness. I insist on openness because you need to be open to your frailty. You need to be open to the death that's approaching you. You need to be open to your fallibility. And if you have that openness, that means you're going to vet your intuitions and you can trust them and you can build on them.
But Charles, Job was arrogant, though.
Was he arrogant? Or was he sure of himself?
There's a difference.
And there's a difference. Jobs never claimed to know everything. There is a kind of famous quotation from Jobs. Can I just say it? He uses nasty language. He said, I created a company where I could tell people that something was shit if it was shit. And I expected that if I created something that was shit, they would tell me that it was shit. And then here's what he said. You could hear this as arrogance or not. He said, 8 times out of 10, when I say something is shit, I'm right. 2 times out of 10, I expect someone to tell me that I'm full of shit. That's, to me, the difference between someone who is really focused on something he has studied, worked on, thought about, and someone who is arrogant. If you're arrogant, you're 10 times out of 10, you're right. If you know you're going to fail 20% of the time, that's enough of an anchor. Now look, Jobs is a little bit arrogant, but if he had said 70%, I'd be entirely on his side. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Charles.
thank you, Parent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. It's